Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to get everybody just a few more seconds to join, and then we're going to get started. Okay. Well, let's get started. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. We're so excited you're here today. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're excited for you to be here and have lots of things to get through today. So we are going to get started here in just a second. Okay, well, welcome. Thank you for being here and joining us for this very important conversation focusing on how are the children. Before we dig in, a few housekeeping items. First, my name is Kim Coffrin. I'm the Executive Director of Early Childhood Education here at Children at Risk, and I get the pleasure to work with my wonderful team and talk to a lot of you throughout the year and across the state on early childhood issues. So we are thrilled for you to join us this morning. A couple housekeeping things. Our team will be sharing links and resources in the chat throughout the summit. And to kick off, they just sent a link, or we're about to send a link with today's agenda, as well as a document to help you learn more about today's guest speakers. We'll be sending a copy of the recording, as well as any resources shared in the post-event email that all registrants will get. Hopefully that will arrive in your inbox tomorrow afternoon. We have disabled the chat, but that does not mean we don't want to hear from you. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions, submit commentary, etc., and our guest speakers will do their best to respond to each and every one of you. Before we get into today's event, we do need to make a shout out to our amazing partners and sponsors who made this event possible. A huge thank you to our partners within the Texas Prenatal to 3 Collaborative. They're not only sponsoring this event, but later you'll actually hear from key experts from Texans Care for Children and Text for Tex, who are our partners in the Prenatal to 3 Collaborative. We are also grateful to present this event in partnership with our Texas Leadership Council, and are thankful to help with the help of HEB for a generous supporting this work, as well as all of our work here at Children at Risk. So with that, let's begin. So we do these summits every year, and Children at Risk does summits throughout the year, and once a year we focus in on our early childhood children and those topic issues. And we really thought this year about the interconnectedness of all of our work: childcare and mental health and immigration and food insecurity and health and all the things that are affecting our young children and their families. And so that was really sitting on our hearts and our mind. And we kept asking ourselves, how are the children? As we watch the decisions being made at the federal government, as we watch our local politicians and lawmakers talk about things that they are planning to do, as that we are in the election mode and gearing up for next legislative session, we kept asking ourselves, are they thinking about the children? Do they think about the domino effect of the decisions that they make, and how does it affect young children and their families across all of our spectrums? And so we really thought, as we were thinking about how are the children, I remembered several years ago being introduced to this video for the Maasai tribe from Kenya and Tanzania, Africa. Their greetings to each other are, how are the children? With the traditional response being, all the children are well. And so to kind of level set us this morning on getting us in the right mind space and heart space for this conversation, we're going to share that video. And this video is originally from a sermon given by Reverend Patrick T. O'Neill that really kind of explains and shares that message that still resonates today. So Bree, let's play the video.
Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes of Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors and how are the children. It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that the Maasai always place on their children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own would always give the traditional answer, all the children are well, meaning, of course, that peace and safety prevail, that the priorities of protecting the young are in place, that Maasai society has not forgotten its reason for being, its proper functions and responsibilities. All the children are well means that life is good. It means that the daily struggles for existence do not preclude proper caring for their young. I wonder how it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare if in our culture we took to greeting each other with this daily question, and how are the children? I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, if it would begin to make a difference in the reality of how the children are thought of or cared about in our own country. I wonder if every adult among us, parent and non-parent alike, felt an equal weight for the daily care and protection of all children in our communities, in our towns, in our states, and in our country. And I wonder if we could truly say without hesitation, the children are well. Yes, all the children are well.
Thanks, Bree. Wow. Um, all the children are well. Imagine that statement to being true, not only for your community, but throughout Texas, and not just in Texas, but throughout the country, and not just in the United States of America, but throughout the world. What a world that would be. And as exciting as we think about that opportunity, it also can be very large and overwhelming and daunting. So today we're going to stay focused here on Texas and dip our toe into a little bit about what's happening throughout the country and federally. We have a series of panel discussions for you to be prepared. So be prepared to process a lot of information quickly. We will first hear from experts on a panel discussion led by our very own Santrice Jones-Hare related to early childhood education. Then we're going to switch to talking about immigrant children with Crystal Gomez facilitating that conversation, and then turn to our wonderful co-conspirator Carrie Judies to chat about all things around infant early childhood mental health. Then we'll dip our toe into the federal updates with our friend and colleague Danielle Ewing, and then we will conclude with our Texas policy discussion led by Mandy Kimball. So buckle up, let's get started. And first up, we are going to go to our discussion of early childhood education. So join me on screen will be Santrice Jones, our Director of Strong Start here at Children at Risk, who will moderate the panel. She's joined by Diane Gerard, the State Policy Director of the National Association of the Education of Young Children. Sarah Sigel Muncy is the president and co-founder of Neighborhood Villages, and Lynn Lucas is our associate director here at Children at Risk in Early Childhood Education. So Santrice and Diane and Sarah and Lynn, welcome. Santrice, we know that Texas, we have 2.3 million children living under the age of 6 in Texas. 1 in 10 children in America lives here. How are the children?
That is a great question, Kim, and thanks for asking it. And that's what our panel is actually going to kick off with today. So I'm going to turn it over to our experts. We have 3 experts that are here, and they will provide all of the insight and knowledge. And then we'll also talk about some potential action as it relates to early care and education in that space. So leaning in, Diane, Sarah, Lynn, we're going to start talking about how are the children. And I'm going to kick it off today with Diane. From a national lens, can you tell us how are the children?
Thanks, Santrice. And I feel so bad being like a Debbie Downer to say I don't think I can say that the children are doing well across the country at the moment. We know from decades of research that high quality early childhood experiences support children's learning, they support their social development, their healthy brain development during their most formative years. And yet, when we look at a national landscape, too many children are missing out on these opportunities because our childcare system across the country faces a really big supply and demand challenge. Demand for affordable, high quality childcare that meets all the important health and safety standards far exceeds available slots. It's forcing states to make difficult decisions about which families can receive assistance. And with limited funding, it means that many states are setting eligibility requirements below federal guidelines. They're prioritizing certain populations, they're maintaining long waiting lists. And the result, right, we get back to like, how are the children? Are they doing well? The result is that many children are unable to access the early learning and social experiences that help lay the foundation for lifelong success.
Yeah, that's really tough to hear, Diane. And when we really think about supply and demand and being able for our workforce to grow and develop, these are all things that are being impacted by this. So thank you for that national lens. And so, Lynn, I'm going to come over to you. Tell us a little bit about what's happening here locally throughout the state of Texas. How are our Texas kids?
So first off, it reaches my whole heart when I hear children laughing or think about the children. So I love that video and its message. It just like what a great start to this conversation. Because it's hopeful and it's kind of like asking us to move forward with that in mind. I used to work, I'm like a childcare girl. I've been like in the field, like, for a long time and used to keep on my door, make your decisions on the side of the child. Because whenever there's that like, hard time to to make decisions, that was important. So I think I'm going to have one now that just says, how are the children? So I can keep that because I love that as a kind of a start to the day thought. When I think about how the children are in Texas, I think about the children and all the things that we do to support them. And importantly, all of the early education supports that we have and how they work. And having been a person that was a toddler teacher and a director and education person, Kim and I have known each other for years that it spans between working like out in the field and doing education to doing advocacy. So and many people in the field can really identify with that. I have seen from so many different perspectives children and the systems of child development, early education, develop kind of like children do. I've seen the growth and the hopefulness, and oh look how great we're doing here, and we're making strides, and then oh my goodness, but we're regressing over here, and and that's how children develop too. So I think, well, how appropriate. And so I think like statewide, when we look at the big picture, like a 30,000-foot view, we're heading in the right direction, and we have so many proof points that the children are well. However, I have to, like right alongside Diane, I have to also acknowledge that our slow is extreme, our growth and development is extremely slow, and children can't wait. So we need to make that development happen more quickly. And a key way to do that is to make sure that our systems are resourced well so children and families can get what they need.
Thanks for that insight, Lynn. And so I'm going to stick with you for just a minute. Go with me here. So when we talk about like our children being resourced well, Children at Risk has actually been very fortunate to have some funding from the Kellogg Foundation, which was a long-term investment that has allowed Children at Risk to have childcare desert maps. Okay. So, with the release of our 2026 data in April of this year, marking its 10th year of being published, what has the childcare desert map told us about what's happening across the landscape? What's happening?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. So I'm going to give you 2 points. And because one is a like really positive point and great, we're heading in the right direction. And the other one is we still have a lot of work to do. So the first point has to do with quality and childcare quality and access to childcare quality, which is why I'm starting with this as a question to the desert maps. And so We for the longest time, Texas didn't have well, we still don't have a statewide quality rating system like for all of our childcare. We do have a quality rating system for all of our programs that are engaged with childcare subsidies. Those are for low income working families who have children. So we look at, as a state, but also as an organization, we look at, there's a report that we made, Paving the Way to Quality, that really looks at how we spend our quality dollars and how are we doing in the QRS system, our Texas Rising Star. And importantly, in 2019, we've been thinking about this for a long time. Actually, conversations for QRS started happening like in the 70s and 80s. And so, but in the form that we know it today, it's really started in 2019. And about 30% of all subsidy childcare providers were engaged with that system, as compared with today's over 80%, 80% of childcare providers are now engaged. Eligible childcare providers who accept subsidies are engaged with the Texas Rising Star system. That is huge. So when we as a state made a conscious effort to make it mandatory so we could be able to actionize that kind of quality, that's doing things for children. Is it perfect? No. Are we still working on it? Yes. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely. But that's an example of us heading in the right direction. So we know that there's going to be that part of the access happening, but where are those programs? And how many programs exist for families who need them to exist? We look at childcare deserts. And a desert is any place where the need is 3 times greater than the supply, essentially. And if you go to our website and the desert dashboard, which I think will be put in the link, you can look at the detail of this based on local workforce board area, school district, zip code, neighborhood, continue. You can look at where the deserts are, and you can look at the TRS levels as well. This past year, we started looking at chronic childcare deserts. And that means, because we've been looking at this for many years now. And so chronic childcare desert means that an area has been a childcare desert for 3 or more years in a row. It's really interesting to look at this for your own area, because you can see, and some of them do go up and down and up and down, and some of them were and now they're not, and some of them weren't and now they are, and some of them have been this whole time. And so having those conversations as a community is really important. Quickly, just to give you a couple of examples, right now, the overall number of childcare deserts that exist in Texas, there's 413 zip code areas. Of those 413, 263 are chronic deserts. For subsidy programs, there are 884 subsidy deserts. Chronic subsidy deserts, 558. For Texas Rising Star, there are statewide 938 zip codes or Texas Rising Star childcare deserts. Of those 938, 635 of those are chronic childcare deserts. So we've come a long way, and we have a long way to go.
Thanks for that, Lynn, painting that picture of what's really happening across Texas. And a lot of what you were talking about referenced quality. So, Sarah, I'm going to come over to you and thinking about those who develop and nourish and facilitate to the little ones, our youngest children and their development. How is the early childhood workforce right now?
They're not great, and they're stressed. And the truth is that the children are only ever as good as their caregivers. That's what we know about their brains. That's what we know about how we've set up societies since the beginning of doing that. And so we at Neighborhood Villages, and the reason we sort of are here, because we have a really hit podcast. It's called No One Is Coming to Save Us. And we actually didn't mean for it to be a hit podcast. We meant for it to be a shorter version of our 900-hour elevator pitch about all the ways that childcare is holding up the economy, and it has to do with children's brains and K-12, and it has to do with immigration, and it has to do with women. And it's a really interwoven elevator pitch. because our mission is a childcare system. And so we made a podcast and we used our biggest rule at Neighborhood Villages, which is that no one is coming to save us. We have to like do this. No one's behind closed doors figuring it out for us. Like if you think they are because they want you to, they're not. So like we have to figure out what it looks like when we say a system. And our second rule and so we had this podcast and we meant for it to be, but it really took off because people feel that way. It was visceral and they want to know. And what we found they want is a vocabulary, because we have vocabulary around other issues in America. Americans are really smart about issues we care about. We can tell you about amendments to the Constitution and the names of medicines. And like, we're really smart about things that we care about. And so we wanted to give folks a vocabulary. And so what we need is a system that's like guaranteed. So you're not scared that you might not be able to work if you get pregnant. That's like really destabilizing. You just want to make sure that if folks want to have a family, they're able to think, I'll find a solution out there. And so that's what we kind of mean. We're not saying it has to be free or, but you need to have something that's not 2-year wait list. Oh, you have twins? That's funny. Click. And then when we need it to be supportive and acknowledge that this is where families are twice a day. Like I'm come from a two-parent, I raised, my girls are 10 and 12, but when they were babies, I had a partner. We were both working, like we were really well resourced. I was really in a position of privilege. And yet, it almost broke me to have 2 little kids in this society. We don't set up a society that asks, how are the children? Because we don't care how the caregivers are. We want you to pretend you're not doing it if you're a parent. And the same goes for our educators. Our educators are the most important educators in 0 to 5, really 0 to 8, but I'll kind of stay in how we separate school here. They're the most important educators our kids will ever have. It like won't matter dollar-wise who your high school AP US history teacher is in terms of your brain architecture. I'm not saying it doesn't matter and that person might not change your life. I'm saying that your brain architecture is set and they're helping you try it out. The person who's making it is the most important teacher you'll ever have. We pay that person the least because we have certain beliefs about the value of the work and the value of the people. That has to stop. And our second rule at Neighborhood Villages is that this is not rocket science. And remember that even if it was today, in Texas usually, someone will go to space for fun as a tourist. So when folks in government look at me, and they do, and they don't say darling or sweetheart, but they think it's cute that I'm talking about babies and I'm a mom and I have kids. And I'm like, no, I'm not talking about moms and babies. You want us to work? You know who's expensive to replace? Second-time moms. We are running America. And so, from that perspective, I find, as someone who's trying to find common ground, I always talk about like no one crosses the aisle. The business of America has to take place in it. So what I see happening in the aisle, because we need to stand there and figure this out for the kids, is that everybody wants this. And everybody wants to know what it looks like. And we know what it looks like. The US military has it. It's a regional system of support for teachers around professional development, around early relational health, which is mental health. The idea is, we trust you, educator. We're going to give you everything we need. We're going to look at a K-12 budget and say, wait a minute, they have an operations manager at the front desk, not the director. Why is she washing nap mats? I want her to be a cultural leader and an instructional leader because that's her expertise. So we really trust caregivers and build around them. Right now, they're stressed about the mental health of their kids. They're stressed about the cost of running a childcare center, running a home. And the kids are really feeling that. And that's a cycle because the kids bring that stress to school. And if you look at Head Start in Massachusetts, every year there's a survey about why teachers are leaving. And it used to be wages. And now it's like, I'm stressed. I used to have one kid that ran away when we went to the park and I held his hand, but now I have 6, so we don't go to the park. Because that's how it plays out, mental health in these years. So if parents are worried about immigration, if teachers are worried about immigration, if teachers, and also they don't have supports around early relational health, it's really tough.
Yeah, it really is. And while you were talking, there was a ton of praise and kudos. And yes, we resonate with you. So people understand where you're coming from and they truly see this as an issue in our space of early care and education. So now that we have a foundation to what is happening, I really want to talk to you all for the few minutes that we have left about what is it that we can do. You have people from all different arrays of backgrounds and areas of focus on the call today. And I'm going to start with you, Diane. When we're thinking about policy and we're thinking about funding, NACE, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, recently released a report on a topic known as rainy day funds. So the 2026 Rainy Day Funds report, it teaches us about the individual states' revenue, their balance, and then what possibilities there are for these funds. And that report has been dropped in the chat. Our states across the nation, they each have varying amounts. Some have a larger amount than others, but in Texas, there are approximately $28 billion as of fiscal year 2026. So, what should we know about these funds? How can we nudge policymakers to actually utilize these funds to meet our needs?
Yeah, I think, and I could talk all day about rainy day funds and like what budget strategies we are thinking about across states, but rainy day funds and that link to the piece that's in the chat will go much more in depth about this. They're one of the tools that states have in their toolbox to help manage budget stress. Right? They act like savings accounts in a way. They're designed to help states weather those economic uncertainties, budget shortfalls, unexpected emergencies without resorting to deep cuts to essential services. States have been spent years building their reserves. And like you mentioned, Texas has the largest rainy day fund balance right now of all the states. And across states, now we have a couple of states that have had weaker rainy day fund balances in the last year or two, but across most states, we have really, really healthy balances. And again, these funds exist for moments of fiscal stress, and we know that many states are facing exactly that kind of stress and uncertainty right now as they're navigating budget pressures that have been mounting over the past couple of years, a changing federal funding landscape, the impacts of HR 1 or that One Big Beautiful Bill Act that passed last summer as different provisions go into place for SNAP and Medicaid. So again, before cutting investments that support children and families, policymakers, they need to make sure they're maximizing first available federal resources, addressing unspent funds, especially those TANF funds. I know in Texas last year, Texas did finally allocate $100 million in those unspent TANF funds toward childcare. Absolutely should be not leaving any dollars on the table. And then also considering whether reserve funds can help bridge temporary budget gaps, especially again, like Texas, if you have a really, really large reserve balance. So we also know that rainy day funds are not a long-term solution, right? They're designed to provide temporary stability. They're not going to permanently replace ongoing federal and state investments. We also know that these vary so much by state too, and how they can be used and when they can be used, and again, the strength of them as well. The goal here, again, not to spend these reserves recklessly. We need to use them strategically. When states have the ability to prevent cuts and make investments to childcare and early learning, rainy day funds can provide that critical breathing room while longer term solutions are being developed. We also can't shy away from conversations about raising revenue and increasing taxes. Big, scary words, but it is something that every state is going to have to consider. And again, it's like I don't want to be a Debbie Downer again, but rainy days are here. We're going to see the impacts of HR 1 playing out over the next couple of years. This isn't the first year that we're going to be dealing with this federal legislation and its impacts. So we need to start thinking strategically, and using these funds, especially when we can tap into them, is something that we should be talking to policymakers about.
Thanks for that insight. And so our time is coming to a close, but I do want both Sarah and Lynn to answer this quick question for me. So, Sarah, Neighborhood Villages does an excellent job of taking practice and turning it into policy. Tell us one quick thing that listeners today can do to champion. That's going to be your question. And then, Lynn, tell us about Texas. A lot is happening in early childhood when it comes to Texas. What can listeners today do to support in the state of Texas specifically? Sarah, you first.
I think just build around the caregivers, whether it's looking at apprenticeship and how you can get to that kind of money because you're in that kind of position of power, or if you know that your school's teachers are stressed and you bring them coffee, like it's literally a layered approach to just centering the caregiver.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And Lynn, what about here in the state?
So the Texas Prenatal to Three Collaborative has been working together recently to talk about sunset and interim charges and preparing for the 90th legislative session around family resources and financial stability, childcare stability, and food security. So I encourage everyone to go to the PM3 website. I think we have this link we'll put in there where you can see the sunset recommendations. And if anyone has any questions about that or like more information, then they should feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Sarah and Lynn, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge with us today. As you all can see, a lot is happening nationally and within the state of Texas locally, but we still have a long way to go. And so, as we continue to work together in this area and also celebrate, because today, if you didn't know, is the International Day of Play. So, I challenge each of you to commit to one action that truly moves the needle for kids. This has truly been a pleasure. We could talk all day, but I'm going to turn the floor back over to Kim because we have a lot more of our agenda to tend to. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you, Santrice, and thank you, Sarah and Diane and Lynn. I appreciate all of you, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise. And everybody in the chat, or use those clapping emojis and those hearts to show our panelists some love. So great information. But yes, and you guys kind of talked about the stresses that are happening on families, and we are now going to go to our next panelist. Panel discussion to talk about immigrant children and the climate and the issues that are happening here, not only in Texas, but across the country. So we are going to be joined by on screen by Crystal Gomez. She is the managing attorney for the Texas Immigration Law Council. Suma Sethi is the associate director for immigration research and advocacy at CLASP, which is the Center for Law and Social Policy. They've got a new report out. And Monica Ortiz is the program director at Bachman Lake Together, which is a great program up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So thank you all for being here and joining us today. Crystal, I'm going to start with you. Really thinking about your work around immigration and immigrant communities across the state. I know that Texas families that you work with are navigating a fundamentally different legal landscape today than they were 18 months ago. So as you start this conversation with the others, what are the big things that have changed in practical terms for parents of young children in Texas?
Thanks, Kim, and thanks to our panelists and everyone. This is such a great convening. I think the biggest change that we've seen in Texas with immigrant families is just the level of uncertainty that families are experiencing right now. Families used to just be worried about federal immigration enforcement, and even then it was this like one-off possibility. Now they're sort of grappling with that very much like increased risk of federal immigration enforcement actions affecting their core family, but also they're trying to figure out what role the state and local actors might play, what information might be shared, how immigration status might affect their everyday parts of life. For parents, we know that that means they're constantly asking questions like, is it safe for me to report a crime? What happens if I'm stopped for a traffic stop? Can I travel across Texas? If I seek support for my child, does that put my family at risk? So we're seeing a lot of fear and confusion, even among people who have lawful status or pending applications, or people who have U.S. citizen children. We know that rumors spread really quickly through the community, and it can be hard to separate those rumors from the very real changes in policy and enforcement that has been happening over the last 18 months. So as a result, some families have been withdrawing from community life and skipping appointments and not seeking services that their family members need. Children are noticing, they're feeling that sense of stress and wondering about their sense of belonging and stability. But we also know that immigrant families are really resilient, and that the parents are doing what parents have always done, trying to keep their kids safe and supported. And so that's where I'm really excited to hear from Suma and Monica, who can talk about their work with children and families and what they're seeing on the ground and how this kind of uncertainty shows up in children's development and well-being, and engagement with services. So I'm going to get us started with Suma, if that's okay. Suma, I know that CLAS just came out with a really incredible report, and And part of the report, you guys conducted focus groups with immigrant parents of children ages 6 and under. Um, what were you most surprised to learn from that research?
Yeah, so also we interviewed over 67 early care and education providers across the country. And this was between June and December of 2025. And what I think I am a policy and ad I'm in policy and advocacy, so I don't get to work with people on the ground as much as I would like to. So I don't think I realized the extent to which early care and education staff and other providers are so impacted by immigration enforcement. I knew that the early childhood workforce is severely underpaid, overworked, overqualified. I knew all of that, but the level of burnout from this past year was so evident. People in these early care settings are taking on so many additional roles, and administrative and fundraising staff are also under so much more stress than in prior years, especially Head Start providers, given some of the attacks that were on this program last year. Related to immigration, though, I think the difficult work, in addition to the difficult work of being an early childhood provider, people are having to field legal immigration questions and concerns from families. They're having to create safety protocols for their centers to safeguard their children and their families from ICE agents, but also ICE agent impersonators. They're dealing with increased stress, behavioral issues, developmental backslides among the children they're serving. We had one provider in Texas tell us that before, children were so excited when strangers would come into the center, and now they hide behind their teacher when they see a new person. And so that was these kinds of things are very devastating for folks who really care about these children to witness. They're having to deal with their own families and their colleagues being targeted by ICE, especially in places where there's been widespread violent raids, like in Chicago and Minneapolis. They're having to support staff and family, child well-being and mental health. They are dealing with immigrant workers leaving their jobs. They are dealing with decreases in programs and events due to the fear of immigration enforcement, and then also figuring out what that means for their bottom lines. But I think the most heartbreaking and the heavy of all, they're being asked by parents to serve as a legal guardian in case they are being detained or deported. I'm sure many of you have heard many stories of that. But that being said, I was also really heartened to hear the myriad ways in which childcare providers and CBOs are continuing to provide support and services and going above and beyond. They're really listening to their communities and understanding what their needs are. I came away from this project with a deep admiration for early care providers for supporting their communities. They're arranging carpools, they're distributing food to families on site, and they're doing so much more.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So I think that you touched on some of this, but I'd like to hear if there are any additional. So we know that one of the things that your report also highlighted was the declining attendance and people keeping their kids home for fear of immigration enforcement. So first, like, what does that mean developmentally for these kids who are missing out on this early childhood programs during these critical growth windows? But then also, you talked about some of these actions that people are taking in order to serve these families. So, if you could talk to us a little bit about both, like, what does this mean, and how can providers help?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of the providers that I was talking to, several of them talked about the concern that they had for children missing out on their 2 meals that they get at their programs. That's 2/3 of their nutritional intake during the day. And so a lot of folks began to distribute food bags to families and asking them to distribute them to the families that they're connected with, but they knew aren't showing up. And I thought that was really, really great. A way of, you know, it shows how much they know their community and they know who is connected to whom. And they're also listening to families when they're telling them that food prices are too high and they don't know what to do about it. And so I think that they're also concerned about, they're connecting families with food banks, community health centers, things like that are non-governmental, to kind of appease and address families' fears of interacting with anything that has to do with government sources of help and support. Parents were also telling us they're concerned about their children spending more time on screens. I think everyone in this room probably knows that screen time exposure in early ages can inhibit language and cognitive development. It's also associated with emotional reactivity and aggression. But parents who are too scared to take their children outside, they have run out of options when they're home with their kids, and they have no choice but to do this. And ultimately, these children who are missing out on the benefits of participating in ECE programs, they're missing out on, their foundational math and reading and social behavioral skills. All of these have been associated with short and long-term improvements and outcomes, like long-term outcomes, like in economic and social outcomes. And I think what has been really great is actually providers have been learning a lot from COVID and really trying to meet parents and families where they're at, which is they are scared, they are home. So how can we deliver our services to them at home? And so I think the adaptation to virtual programming has been really helpful for a lot of folks. And then folks in general are just more digitally savvy than they were prior to the pandemic. So I think that's also been helpful. I know we also spoke with WIC providers who were really trying to move programming and appointments to virtual appointments than online to address those needs.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, lastly, before we turn it over to Monica to talk to us a little bit about her work at Bachman Lake Together, I know that one of the recommendations from the report was that federal policymakers limit immigration enforcement in places that are critical to child and community well-being, and that state policymakers also enact policies preventing cooperation between federal immigration authorities and local law enforcement. In Texas, we've sort of leaned the opposite direction by mandating a certain amount of cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration officers. And this has led to Texas being representing the largest chunk of immigration arrests in the nation at about 1 in 4. So what can people in this room do to raise awareness of the harms that they might be seeing in their communities as a result of these policies? And then just in general, what can people do to support immigrant communities right now?
Yeah, I think Texas is a difficult policy environment, understatement of the year probably. But I think the stories that we've heard have proven that what community-based organizations and what child care providers do can really make a difference in the everyday lives of immigrant families with young children. For example, we spoke with some folks who delivered a lot of Know Your Rights trainings in anticipation that we would be seeing increased immigration enforcement in 2025. So they spent 2 years preparing for this possibility, and their families are so much more confident and have so much more support because of that. So in general, I think creating and implementing a safety protocol within your center and your facility, creating and sharing opportunities for community connection. In one of the focus groups, when we asked immigrant parents for ideas for how CBOs could be more supportive, one participant was like, fiestas, fiestas. So parties, parties, parties. So creating opportunities for joy and connection is so important, even when families are really feeling stamped down. I think creating relationships with local immigrant rights organizations, local mutual aid organizations, and possibly even sympathetic media contacts, so that you can share folks' stories with their permission and consent, and making sure their safety is protected. And I think sharing resources and referrals with all staff and parents so that you're not stigmatizing any group of people. And also just staying updated on important immigration policy developments and just also what folks were saying in the previous panel, fundraising outside of government grants and keeping funds in reserves to shield yourselves from delays in payments. And then rejecting hateful rhetoric and just celebrating diversity and minority communities. Immigrant parents just want to be seen as people and neighbors and friends.
Thank you so much, Suma. Turning it over to Monica. Monica, can you tell us a little bit about Bachman Link Together and what you guys offer at the organization and what families are seeking right now?
Yeah, sure. So at Bachman Lake Together, we're in Dallas, and the main focus for us and the main function is really to be that community hub. So we want to make sure, Bachman Lake is, I think when Lynn mentioned earlier, we are a chronic childcare desert. So our goal is to really bring in partners. And so our family centers functions as having 3 to 4 partners on site. And then we also build coalitions through collective impact, making sure that we're addressing community needs. And so that can be anything from basic needs to workshops for families. But the one direct service that we do is a parent leadership program. And that's really where we bring in community voice, because our ultimate value and our ultimate goal is not to do this work alone. They are our partners. They're the ones telling us what's happening in the community, what the community needs. And so really leveraging that. And so we've done this. This is our model. And so even through this climate, we still continue to do the same exact model, knowing what they need. And we're hearing, yes, there's more need, and I think Suma covered it so well. Basic needs, mental health, breaking down those stigmas of mental health, knowing that there's resources out there, and getting those resources to the other community. Because one of the good things is, our parent leaders are not only advocating for their own families now in the education, mental health, community housing space, they're also advocating for the entire community. So you really, that's the goal, right? You leverage a voice and it extends. And so, but I think the one, information, and I think Suma mentioned about just know your rights, is the knowledge of information goes a long way. I think we've all said it many times, there might be false information out there. And so how can you get the right information, even from registering your child to, pre-K? What does that look like? What do I need to do? How do I need to navigate that system? I think has been even key, even more now than it was before. So.
Thank you, Monica. And on that same line, how are you guys maintaining and building that trust, knowing that there's enhanced fear and uncertainty going on in the communities?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is within our parent leadership program, this was built, right? And like I mentioned earlier, like it's always been what is the community saying and what the voice is. And I think that's where the trust is. One, bringing the partners to the community. So I think, that's a responsibility for organizations too. How do we collaborate? And we collaborate together to bring those resources to the families, with warm transitions, warm handoffs, connections where we're not making it more difficult for them to navigate, even as an organization, our own internal systems of getting in touch with, basic needs or mental health or medical resources. I think that's one key thing. I also think it's when you ask for their feedback or you ask for what the need is in the community, you're actually following through. So if they're asking for a celebration, let's hold a celebration. If they're asking to bring the community to get together and, build community, let's do that, and I think that's really key because, I think we all have our own missions and visions, but sometimes you have to step back and really hear what they're actually needing.
I love that. And just to wrap us up, what would it mean for a program like yours to be fully resourced to meet your community's needs?
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to the partnership piece. How can funders really start to establish that trust-based approach, which I think, in Dallas we've definitely have moved that needle on that, and we work with amazing funders that are asking us what's the need and what does that look like, So and then also the collaboration and co-funding. I think, sometimes it's really difficult to co-fund and it's really difficult to collaborate, not because organizations don't want to or we don't have those partnerships. It just takes a lot of time. But I really think if you bring the resources to those neighborhoods, like ours is a place-based approach, then you change the trajectory of that actual community. And then the other piece that I'll continue to say is you have to work with the community. So.
I love it. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank
Kim,
you.
I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Suma and Monica and Crystal. And Monica, your comment about if they ask to celebrate, celebrate. These are even in stress, families are still families and children are still children, and we need to celebrate the birthdays and the anniversaries and all the things that are important to us. So thank you for your words today. Thank you for your continued work, both at the national level and the state level and the local level. We appreciate you all. So we're going to switch to our next panel. And as families, we've talked about the stress of childcare and the lack thereof and the expense of that. We talked about the stress of the ever-changing immigration landscape. So we know that not only takes a toll on parents, but also children and the environments they grow up in. So to help us grow in that understanding, we're going to switch our gears and talk about infant early childhood mental health, and what that means and what that long phrase is. So we're going to turn to, joined by Carrie Giudice. She is the Director of Policy and Advocacy for TextProtects. Jenny Baldwin, the Director of Home Visiting at Any Baby Can. And Amy Thepner, the Senior Director of Child and Family Policy at the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institution, or Institute. Ladies, we are looking forward to this conversation. Carrie, I know you have been traveling the state for the last year, talking to families and communities about what you're seeing when it comes to challenges parents and young children are facing today. So why is early childhood mental health becoming so important issue that policymakers and practitioners alike have to talk about?
Yeah, so I've just been listening to all of the the information before, and the thing that keeps coming to mind for me is that big underlying question of like, how are the children doing? Well, we know we need to look at the support and systems in place around them, because how those are doing have a direct impact on a child's well-being. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. So as Kim just said, TextProtects has been going around the state. And we also host an online learning community full of providers working with families. And yeah, the thing that keeps coming up is parents are stressed. And we know that the ripple effects of this can be significant if left unaddressed in the long term. And we're actually seeing these effects play out in conversations at the Texas Capitol. Basically, lawmakers are being asked to address the increased number of kids with mental health diagnoses and behavioral challenges. And just these past 3 sessions, we've seen this come up with the growing number of kids without placement coming into CPS custody when parents are at a complete loss on how to address their child's behavioral and mental health needs. And most recently, we saw, the legislature really look at some reactive approaches to addressing student behavioral challenges in the classroom. And in both of those situations, what we're hearing legislators ask is, how did we get here? How did we get to this point? And I think the answer in both of these situations is that interventions need to be provided earlier on. It's key to preventing complex needs in young children, between parents and young children, that's critical. And so addressing a parent's emotional well-being is also essential to a child's healthy development. And so that is really what we're here to talk about today, the importance of early childhood mental health and a focus on that. And y'all, I am joined by 2 experts on this topic, and y'all are really in for a treat to learn from each of them. Amy, I'm going to start with you. You guys over at Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, y'all have done a lot of research on this topic. So let's maybe first just start with, can you tell our audience what is meant by early childhood mental health, what it is, what it isn't?
Sure, of course. Thanks, Carrie, and thanks everyone for having me. Yeah, so like you said and alluded to, when we talk about early childhood mental health, we're not necessarily talking about babies and toddlers having formal mental health diagnoses. We're really talking about and focusing on that phase of development because we know that that's one of the most important phases of development and that the things that happen during that time, that early childhood time when they are babies and toddlers, that really sets the stage for their, or has the potential to set the stage for their long-term mental health and relational health. And so, we know, I think probably preaching to the choir here, but brain development or brain science kind of explains this. We know that during those early years that children's brains are developing at a really extraordinary and rapid rate and creating their foundation for future learning and health, but also for their behavior and development. And so anything that happens during that time impacts their ability to form secure attachments, to express and regulate their emotions. It kind of impacts how they explore the world around them and develop social and emotional skills, and just all of the kind of foundations for good mental health and relational health going forward. So that phase of life is just incredibly important for developing that foundation. Now, when we talk about early childhood mental health, I do want to acknowledge we aren't necessarily talking about, giving formal diagnoses to babies and toddlers. We are more talking about that, recognizing what brain science tells us and recognizing the importance of what they're experiencing on their long-term development. But we also do know that 50% of mental health diagnoses mental health diagnoses emerge before the age of 14, and 75% emerge before the age of 24. So mental illness is a pediatric illness. So I don't want to get lost in the idea and suggest that, the early years are only about development and actual kind of more formal clinical mental health diagnoses are later, because they do emerge when they are most often in childhood and definitely by adolescence. And so I also think when we're talking about this, we are talking about the importance of recognizing emerging mental health needs as early as possible. We know that when you can identify and treat and intervene on emerging mental health needs, the earlier you can do that, the better outcomes you can have. And in many cases, you really can address them in a way that doesn't lead them to have as significant of an impact on someone's life. So not just talking about formal diagnoses at that time, but also really still wanting to acknowledge the importance of recognizing them as early as possible and not just thinking of mental health needs as something that happened to older adolescents or adults.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And so also just what I'm kind of hearing you talk about too is again that relational piece, right? So can you talk about like why it's so important that we're not just focusing on the child, but that two-generational piece, that focus on the caregiver and the child? What kind of impact can that have if we're approaching it from that way?
Yeah, so that brain development, all of that foundation, that ability to form secure attachment, that the emotional and the emotional regulation, the social skills, all of that, and that brain development that is kind of the foundation of that all happens in the context of relationships. And of course, so in that way, relationships really aren't separate from development, and especially for young children, in most cases, their primary relationship is with their caregiver or multiple caregivers, whatever that may look like. And so the way that they build that healthy brain foundation and development is through really responsive and healthy interactions, emotional connection, co-regulation, feeling safe and supported in their relationships, whether that be with their primary caregiver or others. And so in that way, it's really important that I think someone or you might have already mentioned, caregiver stress and parent stress, those kinds of things, those impact not only the child's feeling of safety and that co-regulation because they're able to experience that and feel that, but the caregiver's actual experience impacts their ability to kind of show up and really have those positive interactions. And so I think of the importance of that. I think the foundation of that is that relationships are how children's brains develop and how they develop, healthy emotional regulation and that healthy foundation for strong mental health long term. So it all happens in relationships, and I think of that, or we tend to think of that in two ways, and I think the research shows us this, that it is about caregiver stress and kind of recognizing through a two-generational approach, recognizing that you can't really think about early childhood mental health without thinking of the caregivers, just caring for the caregiver, building skills in the caregiver, helping them feel supported so that they can be present and kind of have that healthy relationship and healthy interaction, but also thinking about the caregiver's actual mental health. And so we know that maternal depression or perinatal depression, those types, or anxiety, those types of things which I think 1 in 8 women are impacted by maternal depression or postpartum depression. I think 1 in 5 women are impacted, which this always surprises me because I would have thought it was flipped, but 1 in 5 women are impacted by perinatal depression or anxiety. And so whenever those kind of more significant and clinical experiences are emerging and are unrecognized, those things can affect the child too. So they, of course, affect the caregiver and are important to address for the caregiver, but those are impacting especially the caregiver and especially the mother's ability to bond with the child, connect with the child, be present with the child, have those healthy interactions. And so when we think about a two-generational approach and how important it is, it's really one, because the child is with the caregiver. And so but also the caregivers, the child's mental health and development really is tied to the caregivers, whether that is just their stress level and their kind of general day-to-day experience of caregiving, and then also their more kind of the clinical side of their mental health and how that impacts their ability to be present for their child. So in both of those cases, the two-generation approach of addressing the parents' needs has this kind of interconnected impact on the child's mental health, and you really can't address one without the others.
Yeah. So as you're talking about all of this, my brain goes to what infrastructure, what do we have here in Texas to be able to address that? Jenny, I want to turn to you because I know you've done a lot of work in this area in a former life and currently. So can you talk to our audience about what infrastructure is already in place in Texas, when it comes to our different state agencies and things that are out there?
Yeah, sure. And I think to do that, we almost have to take one step back and remember, I know we all know this, that in Texas, all of our early childhood services are spread across the state agencies, right? So we do not have in Texas, like some other states, not all, but some other states have a department for early childhood services where it's centralized in one department. There's pluses and minuses to each of those methods, but it does impact how we look at early childhood mental health in Texas and can be a complicating factor therein. So for example, when we're talking about children's mental health, early childhood children's mental health, we work with children 0 to 3 in Texas through ECI, through our early childhood intervention program. And from 3 on, the local mental health authorities pick up that task to provide services for early childhood mental health. That is mandated. And so even if you walk in as a parent with your 2-year-old to a local mental health authority, they cannot and will not be able to serve you in that capacity, and will say that's what ECI is for. But here's where that gets complicated. It gets complicated in that what if I have a child who doesn't qualify for ECI services, and yet I also don't have the personal financial situation where I can go out and get the services that my child needs. It also is complicating in that with ECI, our ECI programs do so much already, and their funding is stretched so thin. So they are looking at all of these physical developmental health things as they are serving those children. And oftentimes they don't have the either in-house expertise or the capacity to address the early childhood mental health or behavioral health needs as well. So you would think, okay, well, then that might be referred out. But if they're the people that need to be doing that work, how can they refer out? This is unique to Texas. So I did not know that. Somebody who had been working in this field for almost 20 years and then started doing it at the state level, meeting other people from other states, was flabbergasted when I realized this is a Texas unique approach to how we do these services. And so, so I just say that to say it doesn't have to be that way. It can be something that we look at to have more robust and inclusive and comprehensive services for those younger kids, 0 to 3, and would really ease, I think, some of the burden that our ECI programs are feeling with that charge. So that would be, I think, one thing that we really need to consider right off the bat.
Yeah, thanks. And talking about giving the support that folks need, you've already kind of led into my next question, which is what has been tried here in Texas? What's currently going on? I know, I think probably some of our audience has heard about mental health consultation coming alongside some of the providers, ECI providers like you guys are doing over at Any Baby Can. What other creative ways has Texas tried to come alongside these providers?
Yeah, for sure. And so, I think when those younger kids are needing, to be linked with mental health or behavioral health services, and they aren't, what oftentimes happens is, for example, in potentially a childcare setting or something like that, they might be at risk for suspension or expulsion. They might be labeled as a quote unquote problem child, where their behaviors are not necessarily being seen in the context of behavioral health. So that's why a lot of states have gone to infant and early childhood mental health consultation, because it's a bit unfair, right, for us to expect early childhood providers, ECI providers, to be experts in all things, right? And so that's why we have multidisciplinary teams for a reason, right? So a mental health consultant in Texas is a licensed mental health professional who would partner with other types of early childhood providers. That could be an educator, an early childhood educator. It could be an ECI provider. It could be a home visitor. We have some places in Texas also doing this in medical settings. And so it's really kind of walking alongside those early childhood providers and looking at that behavior in context, and then partnering with those other experts in the field to come up with strategies and interventions. And it goes to what both you and Amy have already highlighted, that this allows for us to get that earlier intervention so that we're not waiting until they're in the schools at 5 years old to be able to get an intervention. It also recognizes that relational health piece that y'all have been talking about as well, that in order for our kids to be okay, kind of like you were saying, how are the children doing? To answer that question, we have to answer, how are the people, the adults in their lives doing as well? And so it's a really wonderful kind of double prong approach where the direct client is actually the adult in the child's life. That's who's getting the support. And then the impact is exponentially wonderful as well for the children who are in those adults' lives, be it a caregiver or a professional. So we've been doing that recently through piloting, because this is a very new program for Texas, through some federal dollars with Project Launch and the Preschool Development Grant. So in my former life, when I was very recently at the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health at UT Austin, TIMH, that institute worked with our early childhood leaders and the state agencies to make those pilots happen in 10 counties across the state. And now they're continuing that work to look at how can we sustain and scale mental health consultation. So that's, I think, one of the biggest things that we're doing right now in this realm to kind of help with this support for both the children as well as the adults in their lives.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And I know we are up on time. I literally could just talk to you guys all day, and I know I would love the audience to hear more from you guys. But y'all have already really alluded to a lot of the things that need to be in place. So, like Amy, what you were talking about supporting those caregivers, right? Just different ways. And we know all the different organizations that are on this call are trying to serve families, making sure that we have access to more of those supports. And Jenny, just talking about these consultations. I know another thing is the money's running out on those. And so we need to figure out a way that we can, maybe we can look to some of those other states on what funding streams are available, because again, it's cross-cutting across sectors. And so I think we have some opportunity to maybe look at multiple funding streams. So guys, Text for Text is definitely looking into this issue. Some more to come on that. Thank y'all for being here today. And Kim, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Amy and Jenny. So appreciate it. And again, with each of these panels, like, oh, we could just talk all day. So so much to dig into. And there are a couple questions in the Q&A for you all. So if you guys want to check that out as we transition over to Danielle, that would be fantastic. Thank you again. So now we are going to turn our attention to what's happening at the federal government and what they've been up to recently. We're joined by our friend and colleague Danielle Ewing from Sixth Street Associates to give us up to speed on what's happening in DC in regards to all of these programs and policies that we care so deeply about and that we rely on here at the state level. So, so Danielle, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kim. It won't let me come off video, so you're just gonna have my voice.
Oh,
wait.
Okay.
Oh, wait, let's see if this
Oh,
works.
wait. There it is. There it
There
is.
it is.
There
Okay,
you
sorry
are.
about that.
No worries. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Danielle Ewan. As Kim said, I work for an organization called Sixth Street Associates. Kim asked me to come today and give you a federal update. And that is because so much of the money that supports children and families across your state and every state really does come from the federal government, as many of you know. We just heard several federal programs mentioned. Some estimates suggest that federal dollars are the second largest source of revenue in the state of Texas. And so it's really important that we understand what's happening at the federal level and how that impacts your state's ability to support young children and their families. So I'm going to talk about three big categories of what's going on. I'm going to tell you a little bit about appropriations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about other processes that Congress is doing. And then I'm going to talk about some things going on at the executive level in the administration, all that impact children and families and impact your state's ability to serve those children and some of the decisions they might make. And I'm going to do that all, Kim tells me, in 15 minutes. So I apologize if I talk really fast. Feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A, wherever they go, and I will do my best to answer them as I'm talking. So the most important thing that we do to fund services for young children and their families is the federal appropriations process. And some of you may be familiar with that. Basically, every year, Congress has to allocate the funds for the majority of programs that fund all kinds of things to actually be put out to states and local governments. And those include things like the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which pays for your state's child care subsidy program. That includes Head Start. That includes Title I funding for your schools. It includes C-Campus. It includes the preschool development grants that were just referenced. So Congress has to go through a process, the annual appropriations process, to fund the agencies and the programs that we all use to support kids. And that process is going on right now. Under the law, Congress has to finish that process of appropriations by midnight on September 30th in order for the new fiscal year to start on October 1st. Traditionally, in the way back past, they had a process, they did things, the Senate did some stuff, the House did some stuff, they came together, they came to agreements, there might have been some arguments, they sent it to the president, it all got done. In recent years, that process has been deeply disrupted. And that is when we get things like a continuing resolution, which I'll talk about, or even government shutdowns, which we saw this past year lasted for over 40 days and caused really significant disruption to the operation of Head Start programs, to some subsidy programs, and to other programs. So Congress, as I said, is in the middle of the process of developing their appropriations proposals. The House has gone first. The House committee that oversees the programs that really impact our families put out its committee recommendations this week, and on Wednesday night they voted. and they're sending those to the floor of the House. What the committee did was they are recommending that there be small increases in the child care subsidy program and Head Start, $10 million for each of those programs. They are recommending a significant cut in Title I. They are recommending an increase of about $40 million in IDA funds. They are recommending eliminating the preschool development grants and the C-Campus program, as well as a number of other things. Now, that is only a proposal that comes out of the House. The Senate will have to put up its own proposal, and we haven't yet seen what they want to put as their top lines, the numbers that they'll put out, and then they'll negotiate. In the past, the Senate has been very bipartisan and has been very supportive of the programs that we have in place. In fact, in the current fiscal year, the Senate was able to push the House to do small increases of $85 million in the child care subsidy program and $85 million in Head Start. And so you can see that the Senate can push things a little higher. Unfortunately, right now, whereas the Senate has always operated on a bipartisan basis, at this moment, they are having some difficulties coming together on a bipartisan set of agreements, but we have hope because they've done it before. And the fact that the House put those small increases into those core programs, while that is obviously not nearly enough money to serve our children and families, it's not enough to keep up with inflation, it's not enough to do the COLA, it is a sign that the House understands that those are important programs. They didn't cut them, and in fact, they put more money in when many programs were being cut. And so they will try to come to an agreement. If they are unable to come to an agreement by September 30th, they will either pass a continuing resolution, which basically says, we haven't done our jobs, we haven't figured it out, just keep going, and generally is at the same level of funding, or the government will shut down. This is a particularly difficult year to predict which of those outcomes we'll have because, as you all know in Texas, there is an election this year, and it is taking up all the air in the room. And it is taking up all of the air in the room in two ways. It is literally driving the calendar. Congress often in an election year spends a lot of time out in states and local communities because they want to get reelected. And that means they're not in Washington doing their jobs. So there's just a time crunch to get this done. The other issue is deeply political, that there are very strong differences between the parties in how to fund the government. And the largest stumbling block is the president's request to increase the military by $500 billion, $500 billion. There are lots of folks that don't think that should happen. There are lots of folks that think it should, especially as we are engaged in military activities in numerous countries. So when it comes to appropriations, which as I started with is the most important thing because it funds our programs, our crystal balls are really dark and we don't know what's going to happen. But that's not, but our problem is not to say, get your job done. Our job as advocates, as the folks who care about children and families, is to talk to everybody who can make a difference and tell them you have to vote to support these programs. To do advocacy with your federal delegation, with your state legislators to help them understand that we need federal dollars to go into these programs so we can make sure children have what they need. So that's appropriations, and I'm happy to answer more questions about it. The second big thing that Congress is doing is a separate process called reconciliation. And reconciliation is a process that Congress uses. Every Congress has done it when the Senate, the House, and the presidency are controlled by the same party. And they use reconciliation to pass their own priorities. This Congress used reconciliation last year to pass H.R. 1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, which I'll talk about in a minute. All that means is that they can pass things through the Senate on a simple majority, 50+1 votes. So last year they used reconciliation to pass H.R. 1. This past week they used reconciliation to put an additional $70 billion into ICE and Customs and Border Protection for the next 3 years. So they've used that. And now they're talking about a third reconciliation package more towards the end of this year, early fall, where they want to do a couple of things. They want to fund the military and the military incursions that we're engaged in as a nation. And they want to pass what's known as the SAVE Act, which is a proposal to significantly limit how people vote. The Senate members of the Senate have already said that there is no appetite to do that reconciliation, that third reconciliation package, but we are keeping our eye on it because occasionally things happen very quickly in the Senate and they move things with a surprise to the rest of us. At the same time, Congress is also trying to pass the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill both supports your farmers and is really important for rural communities, but it's also important because it includes some of the requirements to implement the SNAP program. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes for the SNAP program because in H.R. 1, which, as I said, was passed last summer, Congress passed significant costs onto states for administering SNAP, which had never been in their budgets before. And so states are having to scramble to find new money to pay for those programs or to reduce eligibility and serve fewer families. And so as they're thinking about the Farm Bill, there are these behind the scenes conversations about can we undo some of those burdens on states? And again, they're having a lot of trouble moving forward because there's these disparate points of view on how to manage the SNAP cost allocations and pass-throughs to states. While I'm talking about H.R. 1, I do want folks to know that implementation of the bill is going on in your state right now. That the bill, in addition to those costs that are being passed on to states, has significant work requirements, both for SNAP and for families that are receiving Medicaid. That was Medicaid. We aid families, we care for older people. And those work requirements, which are being implemented, we are very concerned that families will lose access to their health insurance, and that will impact young children in really negative ways, and will also impact the early childhood workforce in negative ways. So as you're thinking about your advocacy strategies, in addition to the appropriations language that I gave you earlier, it's very important that you be talking to your state and understand how they're implementing the work requirements that were in H.R. 1, and whether and how they are implementing paperwork burdens to make it easier or harder for families to access. There's a whole bunch of resources out in the world about that I can pass on to Kim and make sure y'all know. So I started talking about appropriations. I moved on to reconciliation, talked a little bit about H.R. 1. I now want to talk about, in my last 7 minutes, about the regulations that are coming out of the administration. So Congress writes the rules about what programs should do and then funds them. The administration, Republican or Democrat, has the job of implementing those programs. And different administrations use programs to push their own points of view. So during the Biden administration really believed that compensation is core to the delivery of high quality services in Head Start, and put in a requirement, a regulation that said to Head Start programs, over the next 6 years, you have to increase your compensation for providers to come to parity with public schools. If there's not enough money to do that, we'll give you a waiver. But the intent here is to increase compensation. And the reason for that was the recruitment and retention problems that all childcare programs are having across the country. The fact that Head Start is largely run and operated by women of color who have been severely underpaid for generations. And that the accountability that the federal government has an obligation to make sure that quality is being delivered through their programs. And the only way to do that, the Biden administration believed, was to make sure that compensation was keeping pace for providers in those communities. So the Biden administration had that as a priority. This administration heard a lot of pushback, both from Congress and from Head Start programs and others, that was an undue burden. It was an unfunded mandate. And so they have proposed rolling back that compensation initiative. And that regulation is in the proposed state. Comments are due today. We can talk about it if you have questions. But they also said, well, we want to do some things around childcare. So the Biden administration had put some mandates on the childcare subsidy program. They said states had to pay on enrollment versus attendance. They said states had to limit copays at no more than 7% of family income. They said states should choose to pay providers prospectively rather than on a reimbursement basis. And they said states had to use contracts in some situations to pay for care. The Biden administration got pushed back on some of those as well. And this administration has said, you don't have to do any of those, but you can choose. And so as we're thinking about our advocacy strategies, I talked about appropriations. I talked about making sure work requirements are not burdensome. The third place for advocacy is making sure your state is using its flexibility in the childcare subsidy program to continue those policies that are good for families and providers, including paying on enrollment versus attendance, limiting copays as much as possible, and making sure providers are paid as quickly as possible. And so your state still has the flexibility to do that. So the Biden administration said one thing. This administration has rolled back those Biden era rules. They are also acting proactively to propose new regulations. So what I'm about to tell you is rumor and expectation. So there are two new rules that we expect will come out sometime this summer. One is on Head Start and one is on the Child Care Subsidy Program. The Head Start rule is designed to modernize the Head Start program. Rumors range from it's just going to streamline requirements to it's going to get rid of all the standards. We don't know what's in it, but we have heard some language from the administration, things like the assistant secretary who's in charge of the Office of Head Start saying that the standards should fit on an index card. He believes there is no evidence for ratios and group size, and he believes that the standards should be state licensing regulations and that Head Start shouldn't necessarily have to go above and beyond that. We don't know if they're going to put that in reg, but it's something to be aware of. It's something to know about. It's something to be watching for. They are also going to, we believe, try to limit the access for children living in immigrant families to Head Start and also to the Child Care Subsidy Program. For Head Start, we think that they're going to say those children are no longer eligible. That will immediately be challenged in court. For the Child Care Program, the New York Times has reported that they may propose that those children are still eligible, but they have to wait for 5 years before their families can actually get the subsidy. So I don't know about you, but when my son was an infant, he needed far more care than he needed when he was 5. So just to think about the impact on children and families, the impact on families' economic conditions, the impact on your state as you're trying to serve families where they are and give them the childcare services they need. We also believe that on the childcare rule, they are going to start promoting their ideas around program integrity. Many of you have heard your governor has acted on the allegations of fraud in childcare programs. I am going to say, with no quaver in my voice, that there is little to no fraud in the Child Care Subsidy Program. Nobody has proven that. But the administration has a lot of efforts in line and in place and proposed to limit what states can do, to require them to spend more time and money on program integrity, which will limit the amount of services they can do for kids. I know my time is up, so I'm going to stop there and see if there's questions, but that's just a really quick overview of the things at the federal level that matter. What matters most is your advocacy and that you take the time to really talk to everybody who has a voice about the impact of these programs and that they need to be funded. I'll stop there.
Danielle, thank you so much. And yes, there is so much. We were chatting with Danielle about like, are you going to do slides? She's like, things are moving too fast and changing too fast. So we thank you for your time. There was one question in the chat that I think is good for everyone to talk before we switch to the next panel. Is there really no proof supporting ratios and group size? So was the question.
So I believe there's extensive proof. There have been studies over the years that show that when you have individualized attention for young kids, they are better off. There are class scores that show that the classroom organization and other measures that are in class are better off when you have smaller group size and ratios. But the problem here is that it's not about limits. It's, well, if you're serving 4 babies versus 6 babies, does that really make a difference? And wouldn't it be better for economically for the bottom line if you could serve 6 babies? And it's very hard in some communities to counter that because your state licensing regulations are already at those higher levels in some states. So it is clear that it matters that you have smaller group size and good ratios, but the differences between like 4 and 6 or 20 and 22 are hard to support.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Danielle. Always the best. And as a state where we have really high ratios and group sizes, for our, we could have 11 2-year-olds with 1 teacher. Thinking that's going to go even further is scary. So thank you so much for your continued advocacy and your continued information. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Okay, We are going to switch over to our last panel. We're going to be joined by our Mandy Kimball, our Vice President and Chief Government Affairs Officer here at Children at Risk. We're going to Carrie Judice and Crystal Gomez is going to join us. You've already met them. And then we're also going to bring on Diana Forrester, who's the Director of Health Policy at Texans Care for Children, and Jamie Olson, who's the VP of Policy and Advocacy for Feeding Texas, and talking about SNAP. And then I get to stay on screen and talk to you as well. So Mandy, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Exciting. Thanks. If we were in person and if I were going to walk up there, I'm like, do we just need to take a breath? Because that was a lot. And it's been an hour and a half of a lot of information. And so it's like, take a breath and like, let's digest it. Good thing is that I think we'll send out some resources if you couldn't take it all in, or if you're still processing it. And it's very clear that it's heavy right now. It's heavy, and people are concerned. I'm not saying we save the best for last. I'm not saying that, because all of our speakers have been great. But I will say that this panel of ladies, the information that has been said, there's great representation, that they know it inside and out, and they know that it's complicated, and they are working very hard to educate policymakers on the issues impacting our children and family, complicated issues, to be very simplified, and to encourage them to make the right decisions, and then also engaging communities. So our hope is that with this panel, that you've heard a lot of background, and maybe it's a little bit of background, but it's like, okay, and what are we doing, Texas? So these ladies are spearheading some great coalitions, and they want you engaged and involved. And I know it feels like we've been bouncing around from one issue to another, but we also know that children and families don't live in silos. So it's just an opportunity to give a snapshot of what's going on. We hope you're engaged in all of these issues. If you're like, I can't, choose one, pick a person, because you'll have some contact information as well. So to kick us off, so we have Jamie Olson with Feeding Texas, as we mentioned, Diana Forrester with oh my goodness, Texans Care for Children, Carrie Judice, like I don't talk to you every day, right? We have Carrie Judice, Text for Text, and Crystal Gomez with the Texas Immigration Law Council. And Diana, we're going to start with you. And so Diana's health, right? So we're health right now. We know that Texas has one of the highest uninsured rates for children in the country. We also know that the uninsured rate for infants, toddlers, preschoolers is the highest that it's been in a decade. Clearly, not where we want to be going, not in the direction. So these are the facts, but I know there's also a lot of conversations going on. So Diana, what can policymakers do in communities to reverse this trend?
Yeah, this trend is especially concerning because these are our youngest children, the years when we know health coverage has the greatest impact. Birth through age 5 is when children receive developmental screenings, immunizations, the well child visits, and all those early interventions that can shape their health and success for years to come. So, as a lot of speakers have said today, the good news is that we know a lot of the solutions. Texas doesn't necessarily have an eligibility problem for these kids, but I do think we have an enrollment and retention problem. Many children who qualify for Medicaid or CHIP are not enrolling or losing coverage because their families get caught up in paperwork, really confusing, conflicting notifications from the state health department, and a lot of administrative barriers. So I do think policymakers need to continue focusing on making this system work better for our families. And what does that mean? That means like streamlining enrollment, improving the renewal process, which we know is really a pain point for a lot of families, reducing unnecessary paperwork, and really just trying to make sure that the eligible kids can keep the coverage that they qualify for. Communities also have an important role to play, right? Schools, hospitals, pediatricians, nonprofits, all our local leaders are often that trusted voice, helping families understand what programs are available to them and how to navigate that very confusing process to get access to these programs. So at the end of the day, every child who's eligible for coverage should be able to get covered and stay covered. That's one of the most effective investments that we can make in children's health and development for our state. The challenge is less about the eligibility and more about making sure those eligible kids don't fall through those administrative cracks. That's really something that we focus on as an organization. And I feel like a lot of legislators do see the benefit in that and want to make, positive change in that area.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for talking about regulatory. I want to take a moment and all of y'all can chime in real quick. But it is unique right now where we are with what's going on at the state. So we're not in session. Everybody knows that. Everyone knows that we're prepping for the legislative session. Interim hearings are going. So Diana, I know Public Health, Health and Human Services Commission, there'll be hearings that you will be at engaging, sharing information, testifying, but that others can as well. But then there's also this sunset review process that is going on that I know all of you could speak of, and we just haven't talked about it today. And that's when the state agencies are going under review. So it happens every 12 years. So that's what is unique. And so it just made me think, Dana, when you were talking about the regulatory process, because there's some things is that we're not. Let's be clear, everyone needs to invest. We need to do a better job of investing in our children. But what you're speaking about is streamlining rules and regs. Like, let's take down and remove obstacles so that the programs can be utilized. And so can you just talk real quick about when you are anticipating opportunities there for sunset around health?
Yeah, we have a great opportunity this next session. The legislature is taking a look at one of our largest agencies, which is the Health and Human Services Commission, which operates Medicaid among a lot of other programs for the entire state. And this is a process that the legislature has put in place to review our big agencies every 10 years, just to make sure, like, hey, are they working? Do we still need them? Do we need to kind of fix it? And so it's a great opportunity for community members to provide, direct input to the legislature on like what is working and what isn't working. Because there will be a bill associated with the Sunset Committee, and what ends up in that bill is highly informed by what the staff hear from constituents, and that is everybody across the state. So right now, there's a sunset committee at the legislature. They have just hired up a bunch of staff, and they are trying to learn everything about the agencies. And so right now is the perfect opportunities to submit comments to them. You can do so through their website. You can set up meetings with them, and they are really excited to learn about kind of like what is working and where there's really opportunity for improvement. And so, yes, I would absolutely say now is a unique time leading up to this next session where input could really shape what's going to happen in this one bill that we know is going to drive a lot of conversations around how our health system works in the state.
Yeah, and doing recommendations right now. And as I talk to the Sunset Commission and staff, they are specifically saying we want to hear people from on the ground. And so we know people, and at this webinar, like those are the experts, and they are asking to talk to you. So please engage and we can share that information. Jamie, let's move to food security. Or food insecurity, both. We know, and we heard Diane was talking just a little bit about HR1 and the SNAP program, but we know the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is the nation's largest anti-hunger program, and it is giving benefits to our children, to our seniors, our grandparents, our veterans. And right now it's facing obstacles. It's instrumental for children's development. But HR1 really has impacted the way it's being implemented. And I know you've been in DC. I know that you're running all over the great state of Texas, talking about where we are currently with enrollment, what can be done, and where we need to go. So if you could chat a little bit about where enrollment stands today and what people can do, administrative actions that need to happen.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think what a lot of people don't realize about SNAP is like the lifelong impact it has for kids that are connected to the benefit early. One study estimated for every dollar that's invested in SNAP and goes to a child, that returns $62 in value over that person's lifetime due to improved educational outcomes, higher earnings in adulthood, increased life expectancy, and increased tax revenue. So SNAP, I mean, it just has this monster outsized impact, and yet the passage of HR1 has really, like you said, impacted the program. Just since the passage of that bill in July 2025, we've seen a 13% decline in SNAP participation overall in the state of Texas. And that's a drop of nearly 470,000 participants that are no longer receiving SNAP. And of that 470,000, 250,000 are children. So that of the decline, that's 54% of that decline is specifically children who are no longer receiving food assistance in Texas. And a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around this because they think, oh, well, the one big beautiful bill, like it didn't specifically change eligibility for children, and that's true. But one thing that it did do is expand work requirements in SNAP for a lot of folks who were previously exempt, included seniors age 55 to 64, a lot of them still taking care of either their own kids or maybe their grandkids. Also, parents of children age 14 to 18 are now newly subject to those work requirements. Previously, if you had a kid in the home, you were exempt. And also veterans, unhoused individuals, and former foster care youth were previously exempt, and now they're not. And what we see with these work requirements, again, they're called work requirements. They sound good on the face of it, like we're just getting people back to work. But what we know from the data and from many, many years of doing this work is that really it's just paperwork requirements, because people are having to document and prove that they're working 30 plus hours a week to then stay connected to SNAP. And all, like as Diana was saying, all of that process is so cumbersome for folks, especially when you're, working multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet. Maybe you have fluctuating hours from week to week. And so people are having trouble just complying with the rules and the regulations around those requirements. And really the top line message is that work requirements in SNAP, they don't equal more people in the workforce. They really only equal less people receiving food assistance. And then on top of all those work requirements, we heard a little bit of the challenges that immigrant communities are facing. We see a lot of mixed status families choosing to not reapply for SNAP because they're fearful of immigration enforcement. And so their citizen children who were previously receiving those benefits are no longer being served by the program. And this has a bigger impact beyond just SNAP too. I mean, obviously losing SNAP is detrimental to a family's well-being and health in and of itself.
But children who lose SNAP are also no longer, they don't have streamlined eligibility for WIC. And they also are no longer automatically enrolled in the free and reduced price lunch program, which deeply impacts our schools and their ability to serve their students. So all of this is creating a perfect storm that is increasing food insecurity in our state and driving up demand at our food banks. Our food banks are stretched very thin right now. And so what can we do, right, is the question. The biggest need really at the state level is for investment in the program. Another thing that HR 1 did was shift a massive cost burden to states for SNAP for the first time ever in the program's 60+ year history. States are now being required to pay for a portion of the actual benefit that goes onto families' cards. That was always 100% federally funded previously, and now states are going to have to pay somewhere between 0 and 15% of those benefits based on their payment error rate, which I'm not going to get into that. We don't have enough time, but safe to say, I love someone said earlier, SNAP is not a program riddled with fraud. Payment errors are not fraud. SNAP has one of the lowest fraud rates of any program in existence. And in Texas, the actual fraud that exists in the program is less than 0.1% of benefits. So I just want to say that loud and proud. The Texas legislature is now facing a potential cost share of $700 million that they have never had to pay before. And that is the biggest threat to this program and to food assistance for Texas families going into the next legislative session. So that's our biggest priority, and we'll be focused on that. But then we'll also want to be safeguarding SNAP against other potential policy changes that legislators might want to make that would further reduce enrollment and eligibility in the program in the name of sort of saving money from that cost share. So we're going to have a lot of defense to do as well.
Great. And I know that you're putting together toolkits for messaging and laying out the importance of investment. And thank you for bringing that up, as well as defense. So we are here because we want to improve the lives of children and families. And the reality is sometimes we find ourselves, often, maybe too often, but it's defense. So we definitely can't go backwards, right? And so
yeah, we
it could
can't
be
go
just
backwards.
as important. Can't go backwards.
and a lot of SNAP policy is set at the federal level, but there are some very important decisions that are made at the state level that could potentially disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of more people. So we want to protect the program, and if you're listening and you're an organization, the best way to do that is to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, but I lead a coalition called the Texas Food Policy Roundtable that has over 80 organizations in the state dedicated to ending hunger. So
put that there. We're going to move on. I'm sorry. I knew.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
no.
Go
It's
for
okay.
it.
We gotta go. Put that information there. And we'll follow up with that because it's great information. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, Carrie. Thanks for joining us today. I know you have been traveling the state talking with families and really with providers, right? So having this look of going from one corner to another in Texas and really hearing from, potentially many people that have joined us today about how are families doing and what are the biggest stressors to help inform you and the coalitions to best advocate. Can you share what you have learned and what y'all are going to be focusing on?
Yeah, so I think many of you heard me talk about earlier that in each of the communities we've gone to, parent stress. That has been the thing that has been elevated the most. Whether it's just making ends meet, transportation, you name it. Just the cost of everything. Families are just, yeah, they're tapped out. And so we want to make sure that they have access to the things that they need, whether that's, again, that basic needs, quality child care, all the different things that, a family needs day to day. Things like the different programs and services that Family Support Services offers over at HHSC. And you guys heard Amy and Jenny talk about, on that early childhood mental health panel, it's so important to support the caregivers in a child's life. Because that impacts how the child is doing. So that's definitely something we're going to be elevating. And of course, we want to have that intentional focus on early childhood mental health. As you heard Jenny say, when it comes to children's mental health, the different services are spread out among the different agencies, and no one is really directly focused on the mental health needs of infants and toddlers. And so we want to make sure that there's an agency home for that. And we want to make sure that they are actually tasked to focus on Texas's youngest kids. We want to make sure there's funding in place for things like the mental health consultations that you heard Jenny talk about. So we'll definitely, that's something we're taking very seriously. And I think it's going to be a multifaceted approach because, again, we're talking about so many different agencies that work with families. So I think we're going to need to approach this in a lot of different ways. Another big theme that's come up in different communities has been sometimes families don't know what exists, or the providers that they're working with just didn't know what was out there. We hear oftentimes like, man, if I just would have known this was there, I would have referred earlier, right? And so the good thing about Texas, y'all know we like to Texify things, right? So in a lot of different communities, there are different kinds of connectors. You guys know like 211, different communities have that across the state, but that is statewide. We know that there are physical locations like family resource centers. There's even the Parent and Youth Helpline that DFPS runs. And then we have like frameworks like Help Me Grow, which I imagine some of the providers here are part of that network. And so, making sure not just that the resources are there, but that they're actually being connected and that those connectors not just are working together, but that they're able to share those resources, right, and work together and are better aligned to serve families. And so we think one of the ways that would be helped is if all of those connectors are in one agency. Believe it or not, they are spread across, just like how we like to do things in Texas. It doesn't always make sense, but we've got several of those connectors at HHSC. So you've got like 211 that's alongside ECI, right? But then you've got Help Me Grow over at the State Health Services Department. So, does that really make sense? I think families would be better served and you'd have a better chance of those different connectors being able to align if they're under one umbrella. So that's something we're definitely going to be and already pushing for this upcoming session.
That's great. Thank you. And I know that there's several recommendations that you've put together for the Sunset Commission and leading up to the legislative session. So we're happy to share that. But it's really about connecting, right? So making sure that we get people connected in the way that they are. Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate it. Crystal. And as y'all know, I had 2 questions for everyone. So the second one is going to be really fast. But for Crystal, for you, we've heard a lot about concern, and I know that you have spoken with several families, with several providers. What advice would you give providers seeking to effectively support undocumented and mixed status children? I mean, it's been covered. I mean, I can talk about chronic absenteeism and public schools, but we can see like the benefits drops of people enrolling when they're eligible. But I know that providers are asking, how do we best communicate this information or appropriate information and help guide them when they're serving undocumented or mixed status families?
Yeah, I think that we heard this in our last panel about immigration, but I think one of the most important things is to continue building trust. families are hearing a lot of information, as we said, some accurate, some not as accurate. And they need to be able to trust in their institutions to provide clear and consistent guidance where they can. So providers should understand their own legal obligations. Public schools, for example, have different legal obligations and can't require proof of citizenship or immigration status for enrollment as of right now. And providers should collect just the information that they need and not any additional information that could put families at risk. They should be really transparent about how information is used or shared, and make sure that staff understands how to respond in the event that there's an immigration enforcement in the neighborhood or at the site itself. We don't want providers to become immigration lawyers, but they just need a plan.
Yeah.
Everyone should know their policies.
And in Texas, when we look at immigration policies, are you looking at here's some great ways that we can invest in Texas children, families, or are you looking at defense or both?
Sadly, I think right now a lot of our resources are going into defense and making sure that we, as we were talking about earlier, don't go backwards. We want kids to be able to access, especially kids that are eligible, access services and protections that they qualify for regardless of their parents' immigration status. And so we don't want the backslide.
Okay, great. Thank you, Crystal. Kim, 30 minutes goes by very fast.
It does.
I know. So I think I'm going to hand it over to you on right now. Early childhood education is getting unprecedented, attention in regards to the governor's task force, Texas, Sunset, a lot of conversations. If you can briefly talk about what are some of the major priorities and how people can get engaged, and then I guess wrap us up for the day.
That sounds lovely. And so there is a lot happening in the early childhood education world right now during our interim session. There are three main things that we are tracking and participating in that you all, if you are interested in, to join. There is a new quad agency on regulatory standards, trying to, like Carrie said, our early childhood services are across 6 different state agencies. That's true in the education world as well. And so the quad agencies task force is really to gear and see what are those regulatory standards that how can we streamline those to make it less confusing for families, but also for providers. There is the Sunset Commission that we've already talked about, that Texas Workforce Commission and Health and Human Services are being a part of, which are where childcare regulations and licensing sits and Health and Human Services, and our childcare subsidy sits in Texas Workforce Commission. So those 2 opportunities have a huge impact. And there is a new governor's task force on the governance of early childhood. And so they will be developing a report that will be out, draft in October, final recommendations out in December. And so we are all working on that. So there are websites and links that we will include in the follow-up email of how you can stay involved in all that. So that is my short and sweet early childhood, because 30 minutes is not long enough to have this conversation. But again, thank you to Crystal and Diana and Jamie and Mandy and Carrie, which one did I not say, for this panel and for being here today, and for all the panelists. We so appreciate your work and your time and expertise today. So as we wrap up, we have this quote, from Frederick Douglass: "It's easier to build a strong children than to repair broken men." And so when I think about that quote, along with the quote that we started with today, that when the Messiah asked, "How are the children?" the traditional response is, "All the children are well." And when all the children are well, we know those communities are safe and peaceful and prosperous. So I hope today's conversation gives you a little bit of information and hope into how we can make our world where all the children are well, no matter where we are in the continuum of a care, if you're with a direct service provider or if you do policy work and systems work, that when you are asked, "How are the children?" I hope that one day we will be able to say, "All the children are well." Some final notes. We're going to throw up some QR codes. This is a QR code for our Learning Event Summit coming up in July. It is on July 17th or 16th, excuse me, the Child Safety and Security and Opportunity Summit. So, that will explore more systems change and the best way to support the next generation. So there's a QR code there. Some more QR codes at you. These are our 3 links to our PN3 collaborative newsletter that goes out every other month, our Children at Risk ECE newsletter, and then just our general updates. We are in interim right now, but we know that a session is coming and lots more will continue to happen. And then lastly is our last slide, which is to take 2 minutes and fill out our feedback for our survey today. We truly appreciate your perspective and how we can make these time together better and improve our time and conversations. So again, we appreciate you and for being here, for sticking with us for the whole 2 hours. You made it. And again, we appreciate you all, and may all the children be well.